I have had 6 close friends in my life. 5 are dead. And standing at each of their funerals, I realized I had never once argued with any of them. Not once. Not really. 60 years. And none of them ever said a single thing that cost me anything. There are 3 sentences I heard from them over and over my entire adult life. And I used to think meant they loved me. I understand now what those sentences actually meant. And I want to tell you, because I'm 86 years old, and the one man who never said those things to me is the only real friend I ever had. I spent 60 years thinking I had good friends. I was wrong. Not wrong because they were bad people. Wrong because I never tested them. I surrounded myself with men who made me feel good about myself, and I mistook that feeling for loyalty. By the time I understood the difference, I was 74 years old, standing in a hospital corridor, and not one of them had said the thing that needed to be said. They said other things instead, things they believed I needed to hear. They said, "You look great, Harold." They said, "I'm sure everything's going to be fine." They said, "None of this is your fault." 3 sentences. I heard them across decades from men I called my closest friends. And every single one of them, when I look back at 86 with the distance that age gives you whether you want it or not, was a small betrayal dressed up as kindness. I want to talk about those 3 sentences. Not to make you distrust the people in your life. Not to tell you that everyone who has ever tried to comfort you was lying. But because I spent 60 years believing that comfort and care were the same thing, they are not. And learning that distinction late, the way I learned it, costs more than I have words to tell you. My name is Harold. I'm 86. I was a civil engineer for 38 years, and I was good at it because the work demanded precision. You cannot build a bridge on approximate measurements. You cannot design a load-bearing structure on feelings or best guesses. The numbers either held or they didn't. Reality did not negotiate with you because you found it inconvenient. I loved that about engineering. I was good at that kind of honesty, the kind that has no person attached to it. I was terrible at it everywhere else. Outside of work, I was a man who valued comfort above almost everything. Not wealth, not status, just to be liked. I wanted to walk into a room and have people glad I was there. I cultivated that carefully, the way another man might cultivate a career. I was funny when the room needed funny. I agreed when agreement kept things smooth. I laughed at things I found stupid. I stayed quiet about things that needed to be named. I was, by every measure I can now see clearly, excellent company. Easy. Light. The kind of man other men were glad to know without it costing either of us anything. By my mid-30s, I had a wife named Carol, 3 children, a house I'd helped design myself, and a circle of 6 men I'd known since my 20s, who I would have called without hesitation my best friends. We had dinner together once a month, every month, for decades. Football on Sundays in season. We stood at each other's weddings. We drove to each other's fathers' funerals and said the right things with our hands folded in front of us. On September 14th, 1987, we had dinner at a restaurant on Fifth Avenue, all 6 of us. And I told them that Carol and I were going through a rough patch. That's exactly how I said it. A rough patch. The way you'd describe a stretch of bad weather that will pass on its own. The rough patch was this. Carol had found out 2 weeks earlier that I had been lying to her about money. Not gambling, not another woman. Money. I had borrowed $12,000 from my business partner to cover a construction investment that had gone bad, and I had concealed it from her for 8 months. I paid it back quietly. I never mentioned it. Every morning I looked at her across the breakfast table and said nothing. When she asked how things were going, I said fine. I said great. I said things are really coming together. It wasn't the $12,000 that damaged something in her. She told me that directly. It was the 8 months of fine and great and things are really coming together. She said, I don't care about the money, Harold. I care that you looked at me every single day and decided I didn't need to know the truth. At that dinner on September 14th, all 6 of my closest friends told me the same thing in 6 different ways. She'll come around. You're a good man. You made a mistake. Anyone would have. These things happen in a marriage. It'll be fine. You know how she gets. She just needs a little time. Not one of them asked me why I had hidden it. Not one of them said, Harold, you lied to your wife for 8 months. What is going on with you? Not one of them stayed in the actual room of what had happened. They shuffled me out of it as quickly as they could, back into comfortable air. I let them. I went home feeling almost absolved. Not entirely. I knew what I'd done, but enough. Enough to not have to sit with it all the way. Carol and I stayed together. We had 31 more years before she died in 2018. And they were good years, real years, years in which we actually learned to know each other. But that dinner on September 14th was the first time I noticed, in a place I refused to acknowledge, that the men sitting around that table would not tell me hard things. I could count on them for a great deal. I could not count on them for that. I filed that understanding away, didn't throw it out, just put it somewhere I didn't have to look. The only man not at that dinner was Raymond. Raymond and I had been roommates at university in the mid-1960s. We stayed close in the irregular way 2 men can stay close when they are fundamentally unlike each other and both know it. Raymond was the kind of person who said what he meant. Not brutally, not to wound anyone, but he had a quality I have spent years trying to name precisely. He was more interested in whether you were actually okay than in whether you felt okay in the moment. Those 2 things can look identical from the outside. They are not remotely the same thing. Raymond wasn't at that dinner because Raymond and I hadn't spoken in 6 months. We'd had a falling out the previous spring. He had said something to me I wasn't ready to hear, about a pattern he'd been watching for years that I was too close to see. I told him he was out of line. He said, maybe, but I'm still right. I stopped returning his calls. Raymond didn't chase me. He didn't write. He didn't push. He let the silence sit the way you let a bruise sit, and waited for me to come around on my own. It took me 4 years. When I finally called him, he picked up on the second ring. No hesitation, like no time had passed, like there was nothing to forgive. We talked for 2 hours. That is the first thing I want to tell you about a real friend. He doesn't need you to be ready when he tells you the truth. He just waits until you are. And he's still there when you finally get there. The first sentence is, "You look great." I first hated used as a shield, something designed to prevent me from being seen, dressed up as a compliment, in the spring of 2009. Carol had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer in February of that year. I am not going to tell you I handled it well, because I did not. I am going to tell you what I did instead. I drank. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone could have pointed at. I didn't lose my job or fall down in public or make scenes. I drank the way a man drinks when he is frightened and has no language for fear. Steadily, quietly, in the evenings, in amounts that grew so gradually that I barely noticed, and the people around me, the men who saw me every week, at dinner and at Sunday football, and at the monthly gatherings we never missed, said nothing. Because I looked fine. I looked like Harold. I looked like a man who was coping with remarkable grace. "You look great, Harold." That's what they said. "Considering everything, you're holding up so well. Carol is lucky to have you." There was a bottle of Jim Beam that sat on my kitchen counter for 6 weeks in the spring of 2009, and I kept it at exactly half full, consciously. I would pour from it in the evenings, and when it got low, I would pour less, and when it was half empty, I would convince myself I was almost done needing it. I was engineering my own denial, the way I had spent my career engineering structures, carefully, with intention, so that nothing would visibly collapse. 6 men who had known me for 20 years, men who knew my father had had a drinking problem, men who had seen me avoid hard liquor for the better part of 2 decades before that spring. Not one of them said, "Harold, are you actually all right? I mean genuinely, are you okay?" They said, "You look great." What that sentence means, when it is used that way, is this: I can see that something might be wrong, and I am choosing not to look at it. And I am hoping that if I say this loudly enough, we both agree to let it go. It is kindness as evasion. It is care that comes with a price tag, your discomfort in exchange for my comfort. Carol noticed. She said it to me one evening in April, setting down her fork, quietly. She said, "Harold, I know you're scared. I am too. But you're disappearing on me right at the moment I need you here. And I need you to know that I can see it. Not angry, not accusatory, just true." Those 2 sentences, from a woman managing her own fear and her own mortality, cost her something real to say. She used some of herself on me, because she was the only person in my life willing to say the thing out loud. I stopped. Not immediately, not cleanly, but I stopped. Because she named it. Because she was willing to say it instead of watching me look great. None of my friends ever knew there had been a problem, because no one had looked, and because I hadn't volunteered it. And when Carol died 9 years later, I sat at her funeral next to 6 men who had known me for 50 years and felt, for the first time all the way through, what I had only half noticed on September 14th, 1987. I was completely alone among them. They had known the version of me I'd been willing to show, and they had been satisfied with that. and I had let them be. The second sentence is, I'm sure it'll work out. My son Daniel stopped speaking to me in October 2012. He was 44 years old. He called on a Sunday afternoon and he said, "Dad, I love you, but I can't keep doing this." And then, carefully and without cruelty, he explained what this was. The dismissiveness, the way I talked over him, the way I had made him feel his entire childhood, that his opinions were worth hearing, right up until the point they cost me something, and then they weren't. The way I had perfected the art of appearing to listen while waiting for my turn to redirect the conversation back to solid ground, meaning ground I controlled. I was 72 years old. I had genuinely no idea what he was talking about. I called each of my friends that week, all 6. I told them what Daniel had said, and I didn't know exactly what I needed. I needed to not be the man my son had described. They said, "I'm sure it'll work out. Kids go through phases. You've been a good father, Harold. He'll come around. Give him time." Not one of them asked me, "Is any of what he said true?" That was the question I was most frightened of. That was the question they all, each in their own way, walked around. And by walking around it, they let me spend the next 2 years convinced that Daniel was the one with the problem, that he was working something out, that this would resolve on its own without me having to examine anything. It did not resolve on its own. In March of 2014, Raymond called me on a Tuesday. It was past 11 at night. Raymond never called that late. He said, "Harold, I've been trying to figure out how to say this to you for 2 years. I've been watching what happened with Daniel from a distance, and I need to tell you something. I need you to not hang up." He told me what he had observed across 40 years of friendship. The pattern, the specific, identifiable, recurring pattern of how I listened to people until what they said became inconvenient, and then I stopped. The way I had done it to Carol. The way I had done it with my daughters, with people who had worked for me. The way I had surrounded myself, entirely by instinct and entirely without meaning to, with people who would smooth things over rather than name them. He said, "You are a good man." I believe that completely. I have believed it for 40 years. And I think you are about to lose your son permanently over something you could actually fix if you would just sit still and look at it. I wanted to hang up. I held the phone until my hand hurt. I did not hang up. What Raymond said that night, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday in March 2014, cost me more than anything I had heard in my life, because I knew it was true. Not because he was persuasive, because the recognition was already there. It had been there for years, quiet and untouched, like a door I had always found reasons not to open. He had just stood in front of it and refused to move. I called Daniel the next morning. I didn't explain or justify or defend. I said, "I want to understand what I did. Will you talk to me?" He cried. I cried. We talked for 3 hours. We have had Sunday dinners together every month for the last 12 years. The third sentence is the one I carried the longest. "None of this is your fault." I heard it first from George, the man I had known the longest, since we were 23 years old, after Carol died. I was in the kind of shape that grief makes, where you spend whole days not certain what room you're in or why you walked into it. George came to the house twice a week. He brought food. He sat with me. He was, by every ordinary measure, a good friend during a terrible time. One evening, I started telling him about the year before Carol died, the specific ways I had failed her, the trips we'd talked about for 30 years that never happened, the conversations I had postponed. The afternoon, this is the one that stays. The afternoon, Carol asked me to just sit with her in the garden. Just sit, nothing else. And I told her I had to make a call. A phone call I cannot remember now. The purpose of it is gone. But I walked inside instead of sitting in the garden with my wife, and she watched me go. And 3 months later, she was in the hospital, and we never sat in that garden again the same way. I was trying to give George the real version of the story. I needed someone to say, "Yes, Harold, that one is yours. You have to carry that, and you can carry it without it destroying you. But you have to actually pick it up." George said, "None of this is your fault. You were an incredible husband. She knew exactly how much you loved her. Don't do this to yourself." He meant it. I have no doubt he meant it with his whole heart. He was trying to protect me from pain, but what he protected me from was the truth. And the truth was something I needed to hold, not be shielded from. Because the only way to carry something real is to know what it actually weighs. Raymond, when I told him the same story the following week, was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, that one was yours, Harold. You know that." And Carol knew it too, and she stayed. She chose you every day for 31 years, knowing exactly who you were. Hold on to both of those things at once. He let the thing be real. He let me pick up the actual weight instead of a version of it that had been lightened until it was comfortable. That is the whole difference. That's it, and it is enormous. Here's what I know now at 86. A real friend tells you the truth not because it feels good to tell it, and not because he enjoys being difficult, but because your actual life matters more to him than his comfort in the room with you. That is the only definition I trust anymore. Everything else is company. Company has its place. I am not telling you to throw it away, but you should know what it is. You should not mistake warmth for care, or agreement for loyalty, or the absence of friction for the presence of love. The 3 sentences, "You look great," "I'm sure it'll work out," "None of this is your fault," are not evil sentences. People say them because they care about you, or because watching someone suffer is genuinely hard, or because they don't know what else to offer. I understand that. But love without honesty is not care. It is maintenance. It keeps you warm and fed and exactly where you are, untouched and unchanged and slowly less and less of who you could have been. 5 of my 6 friends from that dinner on September 14th, 1987 are dead. George died 4 years ago. The others before him, one by one. I was at every funeral. I said the right things. And I noticed, standing at each one, that I had never truly argued with any of them. Never been forced by any of them to sit with a version of myself I didn't like. Never been made different because of knowing them. We had been comfortable. 60 years of comfortable. That was the whole of it. Raymond is 84. He calls on Sundays. We have disagreed more times than I can count. Real disagreements. The kind where you hang up frustrated and think about it for 3 days and realize he was right and call him back. He has said things to me I didn't want to hear, and I have said things to him, and we have come out the other side of every one of those conversations, knowing each other more honestly than we did before. It is the only friendship in my life that has felt every year like it was actually going somewhere, like something was being built that wasn't just warmth. I know what this looks like in your life right now. You have someone, a close friend, a sibling, a partner, who always makes you feel better when you leave them, every single time. No matter what you've brought to them, no matter how complicated the situation, you walk away feeling validated. They have never, not once, said something that cost you anything. They agree, they reassure, they rearrange the story until you look like the reasonable one. And you call this a good relationship, maybe your best one. I want you to open your phone right now and look at your message thread with that person. Scroll back. Look at how many of your messages are you telling them something difficult about your own behavior, your own choices, your own failures. And look at what they say back. How many times does "I can't believe they did that to you" appear? How many times does "you deserve so much better"? How many times does nothing you said about yourself get addressed? Because addressing it would require them to look at it with you instead of past it. I am not telling you they're lying. I am telling you they are choosing. Every time someone who knows you fully decides not to say the hard thing, that is a choice. They are choosing their comfort, your continued warmth toward them, over your actual well-being. Sometimes that is the right call. Most of the time it is not friendship. It is an agreement. I will never make you uncomfortable, and you will keep me close. That agreement is not nothing, but it is not what I am talking about when I say friend. Here is what I want you to do. Not eventually. Today. Think of one person in your life who has told you something true that you didn't want to hear. Not harshly, not to wound you, just accurately. Someone who let you sit in the real version of a story about yourself, without smoothing the edges until the whole thing lost its shape. Someone who, after you were done being upset about what they said, you had to admit was right. Call that person, not a text, a call. Tell them you've been thinking about them. Tell them what they mean to you. Because that kind of person is rare. Rarer than I knew. And I knew them for 86 years. And they need to know they are held. And then, because this is the other half of it, think of one person in your life you should have told the truth to and didn't. Not to hurt them, because you saw something and you chose "you look great" instead of saying what you actually saw. Because you let them walk away from a conversation feeling better than the situation warranted, and they are still walking in the same direction. You still have time to say it. I don't know how much, but some. I had one Raymond in 86 years of living. One man who loved me enough to make me uncomfortable. One man whose friendship actually changed me rather than just keeping me company. That should sit with you for a moment. Tell me in the comments, is there a Raymond in your life right now? Because if there is, and you haven't told them what they are to you, that's the only thing that matters today.